Hey there, my name is Harrison Greenough. I'm a realtor in Maryland, and I'm making a video series here to help you guys figure out how to put in a really strong offer and, in general, what the offer contains, and explain each document so that you fully understand it before you sign those documents, and to help, for example, buyers and sellers that are working without an agent to understand them, because ultimately, although I am a real estate agent and I write these contracts every day, I want you guys to have the ability to understand them even if you aren't using an agent. So look through our videos, rewind them, replay them, and if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me directly. Thanks, and let's get started. The conventional financing addendum. We begin with the addendum dated to the contract of sale. So here we want to put what the date currently is when this addendum is being drafted, or if it's added after the fact. If, for example, there's an agreement to switch financing types, in that case, you would go ahead and put whatever the date is when you're making that change. But whenever this is being drafted, that's the date you're going to use. Between buyer, you want to state the buyer's full name as addressed in the contract of sale, and then the seller's full name as addressed in the contract of sale for the property known as, and you'll write the full address as stated in the contract of sale. The contract is contingent upon buyer obtaining a conventional loan secured by the property as follows. So here we're going to put the loan amount, not the purchase price, but the loan amount. So this is the total amount that the lender is going to be providing outside of the down payment. So if it's a $100,000 purchase and you're putting 20% down, you'll have a loan amount of $80,000, and later for your down payment, that would be the $20,000 for the total purchase price of $100,000. The term of the note, if it's a 30-year fixed, it would be 30 years. If it's a 15-year fixed, it would be 15 years, and so on. The amortization is the same. For the most part, you're just going to put the same number that you had above. As you can see, blank years. Interest rate. The interest rate that you currently have, this can change depending on how the lock-in of your loan is, but at the moment that you're going to draft this, you go ahead and put the interest rate that you have stated. Could be 4, 5, 6%, whatever it is, you put it right there. The loan program, you're going to go ahead and just state if there's a specific type of program within the conventional financing that you're using for your lender or whatever that might be. You can go ahead and put that there. If it's a conventional 30-year fixed, I would go ahead and just put conventional 30-year fixed. Buyer agrees to pay loan origination/discount fees as a percent of the loan amount. Discount fees are points that the lender can collect at closing. So in this case, if you have 1 point, that would be 1% of the loan amount. So going back to our previous example, if the purchase price is $100,000 and you have a 20% down or $20,000 down payment, your loan is $80,000. If you have one discount point, that would be 1% of the loan, meaning that would be $800 in this case. So what you're going to do is put the percentage of the discount that is going to be applied here. So you're going to put the percentage of the loan that will be used towards discount points. 2. Loan insurance premiums. All loan insurance premiums as required by the lender shall be paid by the buyer. It is by all means traditional to have this be the case, that the buyer will pay their own insurance premiums if necessary. It depends on the circumstances what those may be, but this clarifies that the buyer will pay them. Item 3. Lock-in. By accepting a loan agreement whereby the interest rate and loan discount fees are not being locked in, buyer agrees to accept the rate as charged by lender at the time of lock-in. So in this case, if something changes, assuming that there's not a lock-in yet or you haven't locked in as a buyer what your loan rates and terms will be, if those change and then you lock in later, that will be the updated term amount. So if things change later on and it's allowable, then you're agreeing as a buyer that that is okay. Item 4, monthly payment. Payments to lender may include monthly principal and interest plus 1/12 of the annual real estate taxes, ground rent, special assessments or charges, etc., etc. This is where the PITI comes in, principal, insurance, taxes, and insurance. In this case, there are actually a few more that could be added. Mortgage insurance premiums, things like that, or private mortgage insurance. Item 5, loan underwriting. The buyer and seller understand that lender may resubmit the loan to underwriting. If the buyer, for example, has a change in circumstances of their financial status and they have they purchased a car or their debt to income ratio changes, the underwriter may need to review their file again to be sure that they're still able to utilize this loan. 6. Lender required repairs. So ultimately here, as you can see in the text, this is where the seller is agreeing to pay a certain amount of lender required repairs that may or may not exist. So if, for example, there's not a handrail on the property and a certain lender requires that that's to be added onto the property, this is not always the case for conventional loans, but it is for FHA loans, which we'll talk about in a different video. But just hypothetically, if they did require that, then the seller here is agreeing to pay X amount towards the repairs that are required. If the seller is not going to be performing any repairs regardless of what happens, you would put 0 here. And if they are agreeing to make some repairs, you might put 500 or 1,000, 1,500. This is up to the buyer and the seller to negotiate out. This cost shall be in addition to the seller's other obligations in the contract. Now we go through A. The seller may elect to pay the total cost of the required repairs. B. The seller may terminate the contract by written notice, which must include an evidence of a written estimate of the cost. C. The contract shall remain in full force and effect if within 5 days of buyer's receipt of seller's notice of termination, the buyer elects in writing to pay the difference between the cost of the required repairs and the required repair amount listed above. In other words, if the seller says, no, you know what, I can't do this, or it's just going to go over what we stated before, I am deciding that I can't pay any more than that, and the buyer says after receiving written termination from the seller that the buyer would like to go ahead and pay X amount that is required above the stated amount for lender required repairs, and the buyer wants to take over that cost, they may. D. If neither buyer nor seller elects to pay the excess cost, the contract will be null and void, and the deposit shall be disbursed in accordance to the deposit paragraph of the contract. Then we have 2 initials here for the buyer and the seller to double check what they're saying. 7. Appraisal contingency. The contract is contingent upon buyer obtaining an appraisal of the property. The appraisal would be at the buyer's expense and performed by a Maryland licensed appraiser. So it's important that the appraiser is licensed, and this will be at the buyer's expense. If the appraised value of the property is less than the purchase price as set forth in the contract, buyer shall notify seller in writing of such fact within, we generally recommend, very promptly, like 2 or 3 days, because we want to get information across to each individual party as fast as we can, because then they can make an informed decision. So let's say, to be safe, 2 days. So you'll write the letters TWO and then write 2. Now, whatever you choose here is up to you. I'm just making a hypothetical 2 days. From the receipt of written appraisal, and shall include a copy of the written appraisal. The written notice from the buyer to seller shall state whether A. the buyer elects to proceed, B. the buyer requests the seller reduce the purchase price to the appraised value. In the event that they do this, now the contract shall remain in full force and effect if the seller agrees to this. Upon written notice from the buyer of buyer's request to reduce the purchase price, again, here we have a response from the seller we're waiting for. So if the buyer finds that the appraised value was less than the purchase price, and the buyer states, okay, here it is, here's the appraisal, we have it here, and it states that it's not quite as much as we agreed upon. That means that, naturally, the buyer is not going to be able to afford necessarily to pay for that, because now the appraisal is what the loan is going to be based on. So in the case that, say, a property sells at a purchase price of $200,000, and the appraiser states it's only worth $180,000, so that has to be the new purchase price for us to make this work. So now their loan amount goes down, and they'll have to either put more money down or naturally exit the contract because they can't afford it. So here we're waiting for the seller's response to this notice to the seller. So here we'll write, say, 2 days, 2, and then write the number 2. In this case, the seller may agree to reduce the purchase price to the appraised value of the property, or B, decline to reduce the purchase price at the appraised value. If the seller declines, then, here we go again, he has to provide notice, and if the buyer decides, okay, well, my family decided to chip in, or I decided just to go ahead and take the brunt of the cost and go ahead and pay that extra amount in order to get back to the agreed upon purchase price, then the buyer has to notify the seller no later than, here we'll put, say, 2 days following the receipt of written notice from the seller. The last paragraph here basically addresses that in this case, if the buyer would like to still go ahead and move forward with the property purchase, they may. Otherwise, the contract will become null and void. All other contract terms remain in full force and effect, and the buyers and the sellers sign and date below. Thanks again for watching. If you have any questions or you would like to talk about potentially buying or selling a property, please feel free to contact me. My information is below, and I would love to reach out to you and talk. So feel free to contact me, and have a great rest of your day.